Okay, it's Tuesday, it's 4 p.m., it's Community Matters, and that means that community does matter. The answer to the question is yes, community matters. And I have somebody here who absolutely agrees with that statement. That's Jennifer Lee, and she is let me get this right now, she's in public policy. She's the public policy director of the Hawaii Appleseed Center for Law and Economic Justice across the street from where we are here on Merchant Street.
Right.
Welcome to the show, Jenny.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's really great to have you here, and I want to find out all about you and what you do and how I had this this feeling that somehow what you do is going to affect our lives here in Hawaii. I want to explore that and see if I can figure it out, and so our listeners can figure it out. Also, we have Twitter, and so if you want to ask Jenny a question or make a statement, agree or disagree, she can handle it. Use ThinkTech HI, that's our Twitter handle. So we're calling this Advancing Social Justice in Hawaii. You know, social justice kind of scares me because it sounds a lot like protest. Are you into protest?
Before coming here, actually, I hadn't been as involved as perhaps I should have been, even back when I was in school. But we do try to take, I guess what you call actions or rallies. And oftentimes it's to show support for a policy. So recently we participated with some other groups in one calling for housing and affordable housing for people experiencing homelessness. So while there were a lot of concerns and people did not agree with the sit-lie bans or the sweeps, at the same time we were really the forefront. The key message was what we all know we need is housing, and so we need to insist that our government, our policymakers take action on that.
It's so interesting because what I get out of that, in my own intuitive way, is that you make choices on the priorities we need to be concerned with. You don't just take them and bundle them all together and treat them without considering the priorities. And I think what you're saying is housing, homelessness is a big priority, has to go at the top of the list because it will have a huge effect on the society.
Absolutely. Housing, it touches everybody, anybody, unless you have a lot of disposable income and security and savings, and anybody, even people in the middle class are going to be at risk potentially of losing their housing should some kind of disaster, some kind of emergency strike them. And we even saw that in past years, and while it's still going on, but to a lesser extent with home foreclosures. But many people even identify themselves as living just a few paychecks away from homelessness, and that's a reality even for the people who are currently housed. And then looking at certainly the very visible population of folks who have become homeless or have suffered from chronic homelessness for years, it's really a situation that's not acceptable for our community. It's not, we're losing so much human potential when we see people who, in other communities, if they just had access to affordable housing and work that could cover their rent, they would be participating members of our society. And same with their children, people who are becoming marginalized because they can't afford housing.
Yeah, I don't think we can fully appreciate the prospect of homelessness unless we do a mental exercise, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. So there you are, living in a house, and you got a job that can help you pay your bills. It's a little thin for you because this is an expensive place for everything. From the gross excise tax on down, it's expensive. Okay, and something goes wrong. That doesn't have to be a terrible thing, but just enough to cut off your income to below the line where you can afford all those things combined. And the first thing that goes because you don't have enough money is housing. You can't pay your mortgage or you can't pay your rent. And now you don't have a place. And everything else is okay, except you don't have a place and you're homeless and your world comes apart. And you're no longer productive. You no longer have any self-confidence. You no longer have esteem. you're out of the loop. You're out of the society. You've been ostracized. The worst thing in classical times was to be ostracized. The system has ostracized you. And where the problem might not have been that great, in terms of the metrics, it turns out to be a disaster for your life. Because once you've been homeless, you kind of carry that as a stigma. Once you've been homeless, it's hard to re-enter. And we worry about you, and we worry about you in our front lawn, and we worry about you, in our society not productive. We worry about having to pay for everything you do. We worry about repatriating you. We worry about the cost of it. And we're legitimately worried because you will be a burden on our society. And at a certain point, there's a tipping point where our society just doesn't function anymore because there are too many people who are homeless. I worry about all of that. And I don't think we can fully appreciate it until, this is not a religious thing or, anything beyond a rational examination. It could happen to any of us. There, but for the grace, go I and you and all of us. You have to see it that way if you're going to do anything about it. That's my view.
Absolutely. I think it's important to remember that there's not some kind of intrinsic a defect or dysfunctionality with people experiencing homelessness. The majority of them are people who they're homeless for economic reasons, and then the people who are really struggling, who have become chronically homeless, many of them they're either experiencing serious mental health issues or some kind of dependency on or disorders with substance or alcohol. So they're really people who have all of them though, there's potential there that when they have the stabilizing opportunities provided by housing, that they can become participating members of our community. Yeah. You're absolutely right that once you have the history of eviction, you can't necessarily hold down your job. How do you get to work when you're experiencing homelessness? That does have a lifelong impact. So it's really critical that for people who fall into homelessness, we get them into housing as soon as possible so that they can regain that stability. Yeah. Especially the lifelong impacts also for children as well, disruption in their education, the trauma. And you really, we see this, you have parents who are really doing what they can. And, you imagine the trauma as a parent, you're trying to work, you're getting your kids to school, but this is what all you have to come home to. So really the level of, I think, in investment there, really it's tragic to see these kind of circumstances, but parents really dedicated to their kids trying to get out of this situation. So I hope that we can keep those, just like you talked about, those sorts of stories in mind, that it's a bad combination of circumstances for a lot of people.
Well,
and how do you
societal level, it's very threatening as far as I can see, because the number of homeless in our community and other communities, although I think our acceleration in this regard is notable. We have percentage-wise the highest number of homeless in the country. How do you like that?
Yeah.
So the question is, what can we as a society do about it? Now, you're with Appleseed. You'll have to tell me exactly what that is. You're into social justice. You've studied this through your higher education. You have a law degree. And I noticed that you are fairly articulate in the matter. Jenny, what are we going to do?
Well, it is a massive problem. Some of the issues we just, even in our conversation and your thought exercise, touched on a range of the facets of what we have to do to address homelessness. Fundamentally in Appleseed, this was really how actually we became involved in homelessness as an issue, is because we started out looking at the lack of affordable housing. So fundamentally, you can have all the best services, mental health treatment, health care, education in the world, but if people can't find housing they can afford with their wages, then you won't be able to end homelessness. So we want to try to help people become independent as quickly as possible and not be stuck in this situation of being in a homeless shelter and having to go through this process. So getting them into permanent housing as quickly as possible, that's what creates the stability that they need. So that's the big picture.
Who does it?
So we, right now, I think there's a whole bunch of folks, of course, that need to be at the table, and we're starting to see some more of that in terms of government coming together. But the state and the city both have resources and have been engaged in looking at the process of creating more affordable housing. You have some divisions in terms of, I'm not sure, redundancies isn't quite the word, but you have state public housing, you have the city's public affordable housing properties.
Let me take a moment on that. We have a show on Thursday called Aloha United We Stand. And it's a survey of all of the charities that the Aloha United Way, helps. And there are hundreds of them. Okay, and then we do a fair amount of this community matters discussion, and everybody has an opinion. Every agency is ostensibly taking steps to deal with homelessness. A lot of them are in separate silos. You can ask any one of them and they'll tell you everybody else is in separate silos. And we don't have any real leadership. Now it strikes me that David Ige may be finding a new pace, a new way of expressing gubernatorial leadership. That's why we've named Camera 2 over there the DI camera. That's the David Ige camera. So if at any point in this discussion you would like to talk to him, all you have to do is face that camera, and we will broadcast whatever you want to say to him in the hopes that he'll get the message. Okay? Anytime. So anyway, so my question is, how do we take this disparate but good-natured, well-intentioned effort by so many agencies and people and focus it into a plan that is practical, manageable, economic, and that will work and save us as a community?
Well, I think there's some potentially distractors or certain hard realities we have to face in terms of addressing this issue. And so I was just talking with a state representative, and his comments were, we have to start from the perspective, we can't just stop people from coming here or say, let's repatriate people to another country or back to the continent. We have to kind of start from the perspective, I think, that this is a community problem, and we need to have an understanding that people are here, and if they want to live in Hawaii, even if we don't like it, we have no recourse on that.
It's the nature of the federal Constitution.
Exactly, right. So I think we should then look at it. Hawaii is a great place to live. Lots of people want to be here, and starting from the understanding that people want to be here, if they're here, they want to be a part of our community, and we need to have the resources that enable them to do things like get employed and participate.
Yeah, they're human resources. And all that talk about how they want to be homeless, or they came into homelessness by virtue of drugs or mental illness, I'm not sure I buy that. I think if you're unhappy, you turn to drugs. I think the homelessness happened first, and then the drugs. I think the homelessness happened first, and then the mental illness. So anyway, I think they're all valuable human resources, and we have to find a way socially to rehabilitate them, to repatriate them, and make them productive members of society, and use them, for our own collective benefit.
And so what that's going to take is, and it's not the most exciting thing to say, but frankly, resources. We need money to help, whether it's giving people housing assistance to make rent payments while we're getting them back into permanent housing. We know we have tens of thousands of units shortfall in terms of affordable housing in our state. And so some of that we see the market is not building affordable housing. It's not building affordable rentals. So the answer then is just like we've historically done, is that subsidizing the development of housing that's required to be affordable.
You don't feel that the affordable housing program is working here?
I think
there's a bunch of statutes on it.
There are. I think that we need more in terms of resources so that that it can be created.
What about rent control? New York had a very successful program in rent control for many years, and I believe it still does. I'm not sure if it's as useful as it used to be, but it saved a lot of people. And maybe we should do that. The landlords will not be happy.
Right. So rent control is a really interesting phenomenon, because even folks who are on the more, I think, progressive end in economics or planning actually that tends to be one of the ideas, I think, that makes a lot of sense conceptually. And so there's been some concerns. And I'm not an economist and I'm not an urban planner, but so for a while I kind of was thinking, okay, that makes sense. I can see this trying to depress rents, but a lot of the economic and planning arguments around rent control, I do at this point question how much do they really apply to Hawaii. So we have it where there's really low vacancy rates, no affordable rentals are being built on the market. So what would be the outcome then if we had rent control, the negative consequences that are in markets that aren't as hot as Hawaii's, where rents are lower, where there's more, you'd function more like a traditional housing market. So I think it's important to try to consider and analyze what that impact would be because we're so unique. And then also it's important for getting the conversation started as well.
And that's why right after this break, we're going to be talking about the Great Mahele of 2015. That's land reform.
All right.
We'll be right back. Jenny and me here discussing advancing social justice in Hawaii on community matters. You'll see. We'll be right back.
Aloha, I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute and host on Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii broadcast network. Ehana Kako means let's work together. Think of the sad alternative, let's not work together. Here in Hawaii, with all of our diversity and the richness of the people, it's important for us to come together around issues on the basis of what's right and what's good and what's going to serve the common good. And that's what we try to do at Ehana Kako. Every week we interview movers and shakers, people in government, business, and other sectors of society to talk about how to create together a better government, economy, a better world here in Hawaii that can bless the rest of the world. I thank you for your attention to ThinkTech Hawaii, and we look forward to seeing you every Monday, 2 to 3 p.m. on the ThinkTech Hawaii broadcast network. We're Ehana Kako, and we wish you well. Aloha.
Not to worry. Okay, not to worry. If you guys could just hang around for our breaks, you'd learn a lot. Because we have the most rich conversations during our breaks. And we include our whole staff in that conversation. Anyway, so to get back to, my question about, let's see, what was it? It's about, oh yes, the Great Mahele of 2015. In, was it 1850, I think it was, maybe 1849. There was the Great Mahele, and it was intended to put land in the hands of commoners, not just the elite, and it didn't work. I think there was just a fair amount of corruption going on, and it just didn't work. And it's too bad because it led to what we have now, where too much land is in the hands of too few organizations, and they are not particularly concerned about the homeless, I'm sorry to say. So, nor are they concerned about noblesse oblige, which means we all have an obligation to take care of the people we're in contract with, especially lease contracts. So here we are, and it seems to be emerging more and more that we need to revisit the structure, maybe the leasehold structure, the land structure, the pricing structure. You named a lot of things you're interested in during the break. I thought, wow, that's social justice in the full panoply. However, don't you think it's all related to the essential structure of land ownership and land management?
Well, it's very, very, again, just multifaceted. So that the land ownership, I think what the risk is, if you had land that wasn't desirable, then somebody could just own it and sit on it. But here what we see happening is you have a great deal of consolidation in terms of land ownership, but then not there's no reason anyone has to sell off parcels at affordable prices because you have whether it's owned by people who reside in Hawaii or investors overseas or people purchasing it as vacation rentals, any of those kinds of things. When you have this kind of demand, then you end up, there's no reason for people to break apart their biggest wealth in terms of land.
And every transaction seems to result in a higher valuation of the land in that area.
Right.
And every valuation higher results in higher rent and higher costs for everyone else. And it's an artificial, we say it's a free market, but it isn't really a free market when you have an island state and it's so limited. And, and sort of in one approach, the government steps in or somebody steps in and says, wait a minute, that we have to have a control on the value of land, because I see 15,000 homeless out there, because I see middle-class people who can't afford a house, because I see it all falling apart. We have to change the system, and we have to stop with the high valuations. It's hard to make this case, though, because the people who own the land are not particularly responsive to that argument.
And even if you already own a home, it's to your benefit when the housing prices are high.
Sure.
That increases your assets. So even there, I don't think it's something people consciously think of, but it gets a little complicated because the more the market's booming, the better off everybody who owns property tends to be.
Sure, and I own a condo and I rent the condo. I don't want it to go down, I want it to go up. I'm a real estate broker. I want my commission to be high, so I want the value to be high. Although it's very interesting, there's a couple of brokers who now advertise for a small percentage instead of the standard 6 or 10%. It's very interesting. So I think they're sensitive to that. But there's a whole industry, a juggernaut of a part, at least a substantial part of the economy, that all want the values of land to go up, and we pay a price for that.
Right. And so one of the approaches that we have to some extent here already is what's called inclusionary zoning, where there's a set aside, a certain number of units are designated that they have to be rented or sold at affordable rates. And so we've seen that Kaka'ako, the HCDA, has its requirements, which have been fairly controversial because people feel they're too high. When developers have applied for rezoning or getting things like density bonuses, then they can also impose those at the county level. So the unilateral agreements is what they've been called here in Honolulu. But there's a question, and I think the mayor is going to come out with their affordable housing strategy in the final version. And based on the draft that was released last year, it looks like it will revisit some of those issues, which I think gets to what you're talking about, that if you're developing land in Hawaii, and we're an island, land is very, very finite, and what you do in one place affects everybody else on the island, what kind of obligation then do developers and property owners have to provide then for the people who are the construction workers or the service sector workers and teachers and firefighters in our communities? So I think that's going to be a really important policy to look at making it more stringent so that everybody building in Hawaii does their part. As we all pay, we help pay for infrastructure, we finance all the things that it takes to live here. So looking at what do we owe the community? And so not just noblesse oblige, but the sense that we're all interconnected here, and that they should be creating, at the same time they're creating high-end units, creating something for people at various price points and those who really don't have any other options. So we're seeing a market that's broken, right? So we have demand for affordable housing or lower, even moderate, middle-class type housing, and it's not being built. In most places, you go to other parts of the country, you'll see new, relatively modest apartment buildings being built because that's the demand. Here, all the resources, land, construction, that's right now what we're seeing, everything's going toward the high end. So those are opportunities then to kind of correct for those market, where the supply simply doesn't meet where there's a huge demand, because it's more lucrative to meet this demand on the high end.
All true. And what I think you mentioned something in there that touches me, and it was the notion of, for the benefit of the entire community, we all have to get together and make changes, or at least be supportive of all sectors who need housing. And that's Mahayana. Mahayana is a Buddhist word, and it means let's see, looking for the common good. And it's something we don't have these days. We should have it. And so you have to not only have political will, but you have to support the political will with Mahayana. I don't know how we do that, but if you, this may be a good time for you to tell the governor what you want him to do in order to achieve the notion of everybody working together for a more equitable housing policy.
Well, I think what we have to do is everybody is going to have to commit that this may not be something that's necessarily cheap or easy in the short term. The idea is that we need to commit to investing resources, and so whether that's public funds that are going toward affordable housing or homeless programs, financial assistance to get into rentals, there's that component, and then there's also developers who are able to develop and then profit off of property here, also having them engage and give back to the community, because it's our zoning, it's our ability to develop that's helping them to build. So I think that we need to really face that this is an opportunity to invest, because things will keep deteriorating if we're not taking action now. And we've seen that cyclically, that a decade ago we were the Next Step shelter in Kaka'aka was opened, and it was only supposed to be open for 6 or 8 months.
That was Linda Lingle's project.
Yes. So before our time, but then this is an opportunity. Again, we're back in the same place and talking about expanding Next Step. So in that decade, did we really focus on housing? And if we did, we didn't do enough. So there's many cautionary tales going back 20 years, 25 years. And so we really have to take action and invest in people.
The problem is that the notions that you're articulating are powerful, and who would disagree? But we have to find practical, direct, simple steps that would have huge sort of telescopic effect. I'll give you an example of that. Not to say that I agree or disagree with it, but Fred Hemmings, a retired state senator, was here yesterday, and he wanted to fix our dependence on tourism and our alienation from tourism all at the same time. So he said, well, it's like the New York medallions for taxis. Every unit that's in the tourist market, up to say a 30-day rental, has to be licensed, has to get a license. And if you sell the property, you can sell a license, but you can't use it for tourism unless you have a license. And the number of licenses is fixed. Mm-hmm. Now, under the Constitution, you can't prohibit people from coming here, tourists or anybody else. But you can probably constitutionally fix the number of licenses that you're going to give out for use in tourism. So his idea, which I guess in some ways it's interesting, is that you just fix the number, and therefore you have capped the amount of tourism that we will have in the islands. And if you wish to do that, that's one way to do it, and it could have, a sort of an extensible effect if you do something like that. So do you have anything in your war chest that would be, similar in the affordable housing department? Some elegant little change, constitutional, please.
Yes, yes.
That you would advance to the legislature or to the DI camera. What is it?
Well, I guess specifically on that, vacation rentals actually that are unauthorized is a concern. So that's one area I know there's more research into, especially as that market may be expanding as the Airbnb and other sites have facilitated that. So I think that enforcement, it's something where there are restrictions on the number of authorized vacation rentals. They're already limited, so looking to enforce them as it stands, that's one way to try to get some of these units back online. So I think that's when we also have been, hopefully tomorrow actually, City Council is here. It's the third reading for a bill allowing accessory dwelling units.
That's a great bill.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So we've been huge proponents.
Have you been supporting that bill?
Yes. Yeah.
We
wrote
we've
been working on this for a few years now, actually, in terms of ADUs, and so and we'll also we're working on developing materials that, assuming all goes well, that we'll be able to encourage homeowners, whether it's financing or the development project, and also looking at a demonstration accessory dwelling unit as well, working with the family to get something constructed so we can show the community what's possible. And that's a really great opportunity because that doesn't require government funding to increase our housing inventory.
Oh, it's elegant.
Mm-hmm. So that's the best
Okay.
one. That's the low hanging fruit on that one.
I'm very impressed. I'm so impressed I want to take a break. That's Jenny Lee, Public Policy Director of the Hawaii Appleseed Center for Law and Economic Justice, across the street here on Merchant Street, here on Community Matters, because it does. and we're talking about advancing social justice in Hawaii. We haven't even scratched the surface. And we're meandering from issue to issue,
know.
but this is what's so much fun about ThinkTech. We'll be right back.
Aloha, my name is Jim Sean, and I'm host of a show called Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. Each week, live streaming at noon on ThinkTech Hawaii, we interview people who have special insights into education, from early education through K-12, all the way through higher education and beyond. Both public and private are areas we're interested in. We dig deeper. We try to find out what it's really like to be involved in making change, advocating for it, how you reform, what people's philosophies are in reforming it. As I said, we're live streaming every Wednesday at noon on ThinkTech Hawaii. And later on, you can find these interviews on YouTube and on the Hawaii Educational Policy Center website. We hope you join us as many times as possible. Aloha.
Okay, we're back, we're live, we're here with Jenny Lee, just sort of, what shall I say, looking at the roses. Maybe not so much the roses, too.
Looking at the thorns as
What
well.
is social justice? I mean, because I think that drives you. You went to school, you looked for that, you're looking for it now, you're dedicating, at least at this point, you're dedicating your life to it in Hawaii. What is it?
So we have a legal concept of justice that I think there's a framework. It's the idea that there's a process. Everybody in our community has certain rights that we have to respect. That if anything were to happen to you, whether it's civil or criminal, that there are things we can all expect and that we're all owed as members of a society. So
It's a democratization, though, because we all have the rights, and some people aren't getting the rights. And am I right?
Yeah, so
your
that's
job
access
is to
to
make sure that
justice
the ones who aren't getting the rights get the rights.
Right, and so that's one component to access to legal justice that we do at Appleseed with our litigation. So we've had cases on things like public housing conditions, healthcare coverage, access to education for kids who have become homeless, ensuring that people aren't overpaying, they're not being wrongfully charged rent when they're low-income tenants. So we have that kind of component where we're enforcing policies that are already in place, laws, and making sure that people's rights are respected. And so that kind of fits into this legal justice, or Hawaii Appleseed Center for Law and Economic Justice, and that was actually our origin back 10 years ago, was that we were founded to do that kind of litigation. But in 2011,
Are you a litigator?
I have a law degree, so I'm licensed to practice law, but I don't really practice.
You don't
so.
go to court.
I do not.
You're a policy person.
Yeah. I get to do
Okay.
I get to do the fun stuff. I don't have to do all the
Coming
brief
here on
writing.
ThinkTech, that's fine.
Exactly. So this is I get to talk a lot, but less formally, which
Okay,
is
so
nice.
is this class action kind of stuff that you're talking about, or is it individual people, who have not been able to achieve justice? I mean, do you ever do class action?
There actually, yes, we do entirely at this point class action litigation, and so the idea being that these are all the sorts of things that if you even had one client happening, that would be something they should be able to go to get recourse for. If it won't change, then going to court. But these have happened to hundreds of people, or even will affect thousands of people, and therefore it makes sense to bring it as
Sure,
a
you
class
leverage that
action.
way. Well,
Right.
why Appleseed? I mean, I remember Johnny Appleseed, but is there a relationship?
No, actually, so it was Appleseed as it was founded. It was actually a concept from, I think, the class of 19. I can't remember which year, but
It's out of a class
actually
in
at
school.
Harvard Law School, and so it was a reunion, and actually, so I think it was even the class Ralph Nader graduated with. They came up with that concept. So I'm not completely sure why they picked that name, but then it's developed into a network of 17 centers throughout the country, and actually one in Mexico City.
I'll tell you why.
So, okay,
I'm guessing.
guess.
The whole idea with Johnny Appleseed was that he went and spread the word. And he walked across the country planting apple trees. One here in this city, one there in that city, and he created a network of apple trees. And that's what's happening here. The guy who thought of that in the first place was probably thinking, we want to expand this thing, we want to plant it in every city. We want it all over the country. So we'll talk about the process of how we do that.
Right, and so I think that the part of that focus to see when you plant and then you're able to grow is the idea that litigation's not the only solution, and even from attorneys. So a lot of the Appleseed Centers, they're generally actually staffed by people with law degrees and legal backgrounds, but they don't necessarily litigate at all, or they may not litigate that much. So for us, it's a portion of our work. And that's why we joined the network, is to expand and bring this broader concept of social justice, and that everybody in a community ought to have opportunities, be treated fairly, and that it goes beyond things that you might have a legal right to. But something like housing, we really should, anybody who's working, and I think anybody in need as well, we should give them the opportunity they have to stabilize. But the idea that people can't get paid enough to afford a home, and so there's various ways we can look at that. So we were active on minimum
That's
wage,
different than this.
yeah, tax credits. So it's a broader
So
concept
you're not
of
only
justice.
looking to enforce the rights of individuals who haven't had the benefit of those rights, you're looking to create rights in individuals where fairness would dictate. Wage is X, and it's it needs to go to $15. Then you're going to be advocating for the increase of the minimum wage.
Right, or similarly, one major focus area has been on tax policy, and so right now Hawaii is actually has the second heaviest tax burden on a family with children who's in poverty. So that's income taxes, and then when you look at the overall system, we also have a very regressive. The general excise tax ends up being very regressive. So there's not necessarily a legal standard about what kind of tax system we're looking at, but there is a policy perspective and a social justice, economic justice perspective that we should have a tax system based that people can pay what they can afford. Everybody contributes to what they can do, and so we set standards of fairness. But
Karl Marx say something like that.
well, everybody's contributing, and so we want
From each according to his ability.
to each
according to his need.
Yeah, so I think we're looking at a system where we maintain a regime of private property, and that people keep a lot of their income, most of it, but that we know we all have to, again, this goes back to caring for each other as a community. We can't survive independently. The wealthy hotel industry, they can't function without their workers and their housekeepers and servers, so we know that nobody can do this on their own, but nobody then should be, because of luck or circumstances or whatever it might be, nobody should be left behind and not able to even meet their basic needs.
Yeah, that's pretty ambitious.
It is, but
It's Mahayana in the fullest possible extent there.
But we'll see the consequences if we don't, and I think that's the thing we're witnessing right now. If we leave people behind and they fall so far behind, the tourism industry has been one of the most vocal entities in terms of homelessness and what the impact there is.
Well, they don't want them in Waikiki. It's very practical.
Right, but then they'll end up being where they live, or so.
Well, that sweep business
Yeah.
is really something, because it doesn't really solve the problem at all.
No.
But what about, going back to tax? I was interested in your thought about tax. We've had a number of guests on the program who have expressed concern about the gross excise tax. Because, to start, every sales tax, certainly gross excise tax, is regressive. And it does not help the little guy. It hurts the little guy, relatively speaking. The guy with lots of money, he doesn't care, no big deal. But the little guy pays a higher percentage of his income toward this tax. What's worse, and I was practicing law when this was all happening. There was a concerted effort back in the 60s and 70s to make the gross excise tax as ubiquitous as possible. Mm-hmm. No exceptions. The government would not brook any exceptions or exclusions or reductions. It was supposed to cover everything. Drugs, food, you name it, everything. And we have inherited that. Mm-hmm. And I think that it doesn't solve the problem to make the gross excise tax go away, but the gross excise tax makes it worse. It escalates the problem for homeless people and for people who are, candidates for homelessness. So why, for example, doesn't the Appleseed Center for Law and Economic Justice go after the gross excise tax and say, we are putting in a bill that excludes food and drugs from the gross excise tax, which should have happened a long time ago, in my opinion. Why don't you do that?
Well, if we were starting a system from scratch, then I think those kind of considerations, excluding groceries, which a number of states do, or giving a preferential tax rate on groceries, so something that's reduced, looking at that, that makes a lot of sense. But we are where we are now, and we've structured our tax system in something of an unusual way. We have very low property taxes, the lowest in the country, high home values, but even when you look at the check you write out, it's still relatively low compared to most parts of the country. And actually, that's an interesting interaction there. There was a shift in the 1930s when the big five landowners didn't want high property taxes. They wanted a broad-based consumption tax.
The property owners pay
exactly.
less, and the little guy pays more.
Right, because you're
What a
spending
deal.
right, exactly. So if we're looking at that, I think that's a different question. But where we are right now, we have this system with income taxes comprising a significant component, but certainly the GET is a huge part of our revenues. And I think the part of the reason, a big reason people like it is because there's a sense, a lot of tourists are the ones paying this. We're able to outsource it because it's charged on goods and services. So
Why does that not satisfy me?
well, because you're paying it as well. But the reason though we have been focused on issues around the GET, but with a focus on credits that target people who need it the most, so that we can maintain revenue we need for essential services, so schools, health, public safety, all of that. That we keep the revenue we need, but then try to give targeted tax relief in the form of credits. So everybody benefits equally from removing groceries from the GET, but not everybody needs that financial help the same. So because we have competing interests that we need to operate everything, we have to pay to run our state, but then at the same time, we know people are in need, then we've advocated for targeted tax credits. So this past session, saw an increase in the food excise tax credit that we advocated very strongly for. And so that was the first time in about almost 10 years. So next year, there will be a small increase. Frankly, we know it's not enough. There's a low-income household renters credit that's intended to help relieve GET on rent and property taxes. That hasn't been increased in 30 years.
It all sounds very complicated.
It is complicated, but the idea being, targeted tax relief, it takes, and these proposals are already on the books. It's a matter of just getting up to date with
tuning them
2015.
for current times.
Yeah, because it's been over 30 years for the renters credit, so probably about time.
I worry, though, and this would be the last question I will ask you. I worry, though, somebody not too long ago said that the average collective, what do you want to call it, welfare payment, that goes to somebody on welfare in Hawaii, and there are a lot of people on welfare in Hawaii, we don't realize how many, is really high. It's like $60,000. I think it might be higher than that yet. And the taxpayers paying that. And so, you get a disparity there, and you make it hard for the society to work well if you're just taking from the rich or middle class and giving to the poor.
Well,
How do you respond to that in terms of looking forward to a place where we can all live a reasonable life?
So that study, not to go too deep into the weeds, that the Cato Institute produced, the one I think you're referring to, and that was fairly skewed in that it assumed the absolute maximum number of benefits. So you would have to have, be so specific. You would be a family of this size with children under this age, qualifying for these very specific things, and that virtually never happens. It's just nobody's going to hit all of those marks. And we actually have a significant number of people who are eligible for programs like SNAP, food stamps, that aren't claiming it. So even the broader outlook, is this actually happening in any significant way? Not really. But also that when we look at the extent and rates of poverty here in Hawaii, the U.S. Census Bureau has what's called the supplemental poverty measure, and that actually looks at how Hawaii and other states are doing when you take into account all that kind of financial assistance available from the government. And so with that, even though Hawaii doesn't sound like we're that poor of a state, when you look at the official poverty measure, when you look at supplemental poverty measure, which takes into account the cost of living and all the potential public benefits you could get, we actually are the 7th highest state in terms of poverty. We actually end up being poorer than Mississippi because of our high
And
cost of
especially the
living.
neighbor islands. We're
Yeah.
going to have to leave it there. Jenny Lee, a person who is going to change our world and who reflects, in my opinion, the fact that we are in a transformation already. Call it a social justice transformation. She's not the only one. Her generation is looking for equity. It's looking to remake our society, and I think you have to agree, our society must and will be remade, and she's going to be part of it. Thank you for coming down, Jenny Lee.
Well, thank you so much.
Aloha.